Welcome to the meta episode, the end of season 39, before we go into season 40. This time I will start the video playing in the background sooner. We're watching Skelterix, or Nithirix, as he changed his name due to some guild merger reasons. Anyway, the meta, the reason why you're here, to hear me blah blah blah. So, this is looking at the state of the competitive GAC meta. What sort of teams made a difference, what datacrons, how they interact together, what happened in the past season, what's going to happen in the next season, my thoughts on what's going to happen in the next season, different combinations, popularity, what's competitive, etc. Who am I? I'm a 12 million-ish player, plays in the top 100-ish. I've been as high as number 2 and as low as, well, whatever it was when the GAC new format started. Anyway, I think now I'm 20 or something. The most important thing though is I watch a huge amount of GAC fights for Grand Arena Science, for all the counters we have there. So I have a pretty good idea of what sort of things are popular, what's not popular, how people are changing their rosters, changing their play styles, etc. So, welcome back again. I'll break this up into 4 major areas. One is 3v3, one is 5v5, one is ships, and finally like the overall game state and sort of where we are. And we'll spend most of the time talking about the overall game state because that is a fascinating place now that we have the new raid system and the Krayt Dragon raid. And speaking about that, that's pointing here, Skelterix has a lot of those great videos. It's been very helpful for a ton of people outside of the GAC stuff, which he's great at too. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. And just warning you ahead of time, this is likely to be long, near the end in particular, where I talk about the raid changes and how it changes the overall structure of the game, in my opinion. Well, not changes, but like solidifies some of the changes that I think that CG has been trying to make over the past year. And what I think it means for the future of GAC and other parts of the game as well. So, 3v3, this last 3v3 season. I did think it would be a doozy, and it was pretty much a doozy, but not for all the reasons that I was thinking it would be that. The unexpected reason was the Datacron sort of mess up by CG, where in the Datacron store they had last season's materials, not the new season's materials. So they sort of compensated us, air quotes, by giving us the opportunity to spend more. Basically, either in charge up currency or crystals, you could every 8 hours or 6 hours, every 6 hours when the shop refreshed, you could buy more materials. So a lot of people, just like myself included, spent a lot of charge up currency, and some people spent crystals to get a large store of datacrons. So I think this mostly benefited the PvP enthusiasts, like gave them a huge leg up. PvP enthusiasts / spenders, I mean, if you're just a spender, why do you get datacrons unless you're doing PvP? So you have to sort of be a PvP, a GAC or TW enthusiast to spend datacrons, to spend on datacrons or use your resources there. So for many people, they have more datacrons now than they would normally have at the end of 2 conquest sessions. So this conquest, or this beginning of this 5v5 season, is going to be sort of interesting because of that. But we're talking about 3v3, and basically it meant 3v3 was very sort of, the first week wasn't as crazy as it often is because people could compensate their attempts at new counters by using their built-up datacrons. Not necessarily as a crutch, just a compensation device. And in general, like the whole season sort of continued to reflect that. There was a lot of, well, it was that and the GAC Insight. So GG introduced this new tool that it's in beta for the next few months, and then it costs $10 a month. Whether it's worth $10 a month is up to each person, but it is a huge improvement over the counters, which will remain free and available. It's an awesome tool. You can do a lot of stuff with it, a lot of stuff that you don't necessarily see on first glance, but a whole different topic. But it gave people who are spending the time to try and do well in GAC the ability to look and see, if a counter is 67% success on the normal counters page. Does that mean it's 67% success because there's just some RNG involved, or 90% of the failures are people attacking with non-relic team versus relic teams? So it allowed you to drill down a lot more into gear levels, skill ranges, omicrons, datacrons, whatever. Fantastic tool. So I would say this more than anything else, although the datacron mess up definitely made an impact. This, more than almost anything else, made the good players, or the players with time, the players with extra time, well, not even really extra time. It's almost less time to use this than the regular counters tool, because you don't have to think as much, like the specific gear levels and datacrons, like I mentioned, for each of the teams. So in some ways it's a time saver, although there's a lot more variables to consider depending on the complexity of the counter, the unknownness of the counter you're using. But that sort of like evened out. There was less crazy failures for most serious players who use GAC Insight. Radis is an amazing offensive team. So yeah, this is not necessarily anything new, but I would say now it's gotten to the stage where it's common. I definitely want to give a kind of to Fatal. I remember he mentioned, like, during the initial kit reveal of Radis, when he was reviewing it on his stream, how he was thinking of how it could be used in offense. But I think it's sort of gotten a big advantage now that set 6 is gone, because set 6 gave a huge advantage to Darkside teams and start first teams, and neither Radis couldn't benefit from either of those, and teams that fought him could benefit from both of those. Or teams that he was up against could benefit from both of those. So I think this 3v3 season, Radis sort of came into his own as a very flexible, powerful offensive team, especially with some of the mechanics of the new characters. But I think that'll continue, especially in 5v5. So another cool thing that will probably continue into 5v5, but it's more because the benefits that 8th Brother get with his AoE, which he will have the opportunity to do before something can stop him, probably. I mean, there's some situations where the whole team can be feared if Revan goes before 8th Brother, which is great. But Malgus is actually a pretty good Reaver counter. There's not a lot of players who are using him as that, but the ones who did, if you use the correct team comp versus the correct team comp, and again, just go to GAC history or Insight to see the details. It's an excellent counter. In one way, it's sort of expensive because you're using Malgus, but on the other hand, it's not that expensive if you consider what you can do with Traya and Savage. Like that's 2 whole teams in 3v3. In 5v5, it's 1 team, or theoretically, if you put it with C, you're making 1 team way stronger. But anyway, Malgus versus Riva is quite good. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on 3v3 because it's done with, and we'll never see this combination of datacrons again, but I'm trying to highlight things that make a difference in 5v5, or you can keep in mind for future 3v3 seasons. The datacrons won't change it that much. Like, this is something I saw more than 5 times, where players would use JMK Cat, Mace, or Kenobi, or something like that, versus Jabba, Boosh, and Kerr. And they would go for a sharp ult and try and leap Boosh first. It's never a better choice, ever, 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 ever. You effectively think of it as I think I highlighted this in my, yeah. Anyway, you can read this if you want more specific details, but basically the whole thing about fighting the Java team, you have to get through 4 members of the team, and each of them have a certain level of health, protection, and defense, and some regeneration. But JMK sort of neuters the regeneration with his healing immunity. Um, and then time to ult. Obviously, Jabba's time to ult is you have to kill Jabba before he ults, which is extremely easy if you leap the Wookiee first, because then you effectively have like you cut off a quarter of the health and protection, and certainly the unit with the highest defense by leaping him first, and you do it immediately. So I don't know why this is a thing, but the amount of people who chose to go for a short ult and then leap Boosh first, shocking. Some won. You can still win that way. It's not like you're going to guarantee to lose, but I would say half of them lost at least. Ridiculous. I'll go over some of the next 3 or the upcoming 5v5 season stuff in the meta minute. I'm going to try and keep doing that after the first week. I think it's very interesting and seems to be valuable for some folks, so keep doing that. So let's move on to 5v5. So this is going to be an interesting one. As I mentioned before, the competitive players already have a bit of an advantage when it comes to Datacrons. So by the second week, everybody will sort of be caught up. But even before this conquest starts, like it's this first few days of conquest or the first week of conquest before the first week of GAC, there's going to be a lot of little tweaking to Datacrons, maybe getting some up a little bit higher that you haven't quite gotten to where you wanted, finding a few more level 9s, or finding a level 6 that you had trouble with before. But in general, I think that while the Datacrons are always important and play a big role, obviously, compared to most normal start at 5v5, they will play a little bit less of a role, since most competitive players have a larger amount of them than they normally would have because of the impact last month. I still do think that this set of set 7 and set 8 together is one of the most powerful we've had ever for the whole roster. Not obviously some like set 4 for Empire and Lord Vader and Darth Vader, and set 2 with the Jedi, Rey, and stuff like that. Like those are individually maybe more powerful for that faction, or made one team like the most powerful team by a large margin. But I think for the entire roster, these 2 Datacron sets together give a huge power boost to virtually every team. Probably it like favors the offensive, the attacking time a little bit more, because none of the level 9s are like amazing on defense. Some are very good, but I think the stats generally tend to favor attacking teams more, because you can match the stats of the defending Datacron and find something that fits to give yourself a better chance. All right, a few little specifics. So I haven't seen anybody comment about it, but I've seen it in effect quite a few times. The Ben level 9 is terrible on Rey versus Starkiller, because it restores him instantly to full health and gives him a turn, and then he's out of damage immunity and you can just work him down again right away. Pretty bad. I think Rey in general is in an interesting place for this season. So last season with Afra, last 5v5 season with Afra, nobody really placed Jabba at the end because Jabba was easy 63, 64, 65 with Afra. And because of that, Rey started to be moved off of defense as well a little bit, because Jabba was a fantastic counter to Rey, and still is a fantastic counter. The loss of set 6 didn't really change anything in that regards. So this whole shift we have now with the GLs in particular, Rey is sort of figured out. She still can be tough to beat depending on if you play Zori or Cal, which level 9 you use. I mean, she still definitely has difficult compositions, but Java still beats her very easily in all of those. However, Java is now really, really great on defense because there's no Afro to kill him. So it's generally Kylo or JMK. You need some like weird JMK comps to get yourself a good chance at success, but you can still do it. Just look at GAC history. Um, SLK is probably the most reliable with standard comps, but it's a bit of a gear check. A good level 7 DC from Java can still shut that down. I think Night Sisters with Marin, good, well-modded Night Sisters and Relic Night Sisters with Marin should be able to do Java. CLS should be able to do Java as well, but again, with both of those, there's like datacrons that can sort of shut it down. So it's Java, I think, is going to be the key as a GL to how this next season goes. And by what your opponent does with Java or what you do with Java, that's going to affect also the power level of Ray. But if Java's on defense, then they can't use Java to kill your Ray, so you have a little bit more freedom to make some weird, like anti-Star Killer Ray comps or anti-JML Ray comps or something like that. So going on to the next point here. So we talked about Java and what beats it reliably, a few different options there. I think week 1 is still going to be interesting because there's no GAC history, obviously, and set 6 was a dramatic, like the set 6 datacrons are dramatically different than the set 7 and set 8 datacrons together. Like there's a huge variety of teams that simply don't work now in the current or in the upcoming 5v5 season. So there'll always be some interesting counters there. That's one of my favorite parts of the season. Trench. Trench is a good character. He worked quite well, and I got a couple of holds, I think, in 3v3. And I saw him used pretty effectively on offense in a few places, but his comp made a great deal of difference. Like Trench with Newt and Django was definitely the most powerful. So we'll see how that works in 5v5. I think with his Datacron level 9, he's quite good. Not amazing, but he'll find some team that he can take out with a high chance of success, like a good A-level team. But after it runs out, I expect him to be like, because he is a TW character after all, Omicron-wise, I expect him to be somewhere, Scion, a Django, or a Sing or something, where they play a key role in a team versus some other specific teams, but not something you want to necessarily use every single round. On the other hand, Tuskens. So this is interesting. The Tuskens are quite good against like CLS, for instance, if you're using them on offense. On defense, they have a couple of, not hard, but a couple of reliable counters. The difference is there's the counters that do well against them, do well against a number of other teams. And it depends on sort of what your board state is, I guess. Like Tuskens in the back wall, or one of the other teams. Probably Tuskens in the back wall, I think, will be the play, or keep them for offense. Because I do expect them, especially with people leveling them up, gearing them up, modding them well, I expect them to be able to beat some GLs with a well set up team. So that's going to be very interesting. Critical damage Datacrons. Yeah, this is the stat that I think everybody's going to be looking for. Sort of like defense season 6, where virtually any team can benefit from it. Not any team, but the vast majority of teams can benefit from it. You can put it on defense and an offense. It's going to be great. Mostly on defense, I think. Some teams you're going to sort of want it for offense, but on defense you have the most chance to sort of surprise your opponents or or make them lose some banners. Accuracy. I think I'm going to try and build 1 or 2 accuracy datacrons. Like I can put it with my JMK Ufu datacron. Doesn't hurt him. There's a few other teams where accuracy is not bad, and it's mostly the level 3 or the level 6 that you're going for. So accuracy critical damage, or accuracy health steal, or something like that. But I don't think it would be a bad idea, because we talked about it in last show. Who really knows what they're going to do with set 9? Dodge is very much a possibility. So, not bad this conquest session to work on accuracy a bit for 1 or 2 datacrons. Ships, there's no change from last month, so I'm not going to spend any time on it. You can read through this if you like. But there's nothing in particular that stands out from a ship perspective. Mostly people preparing for the new Sith meta in August, I guess. That seems most likely. So not a lot to say about ships. It's pretty normal. It's good. I think it's in a good state. But it gets solved quickly because there's no mods or any variables on ships, unfortunately. So let's move on to what will definitely take, I think we're 20 minutes in here, and I might talk for another half an hour about this. The game state is in a fascinating place right now. So I think there's no way you can, or no way that you haven't heard or seen or think that the game is changing, let's say over the last year and a half, how it's approaching new players, old players, power level, gear, what the game is about, sort of, in some ways returning to its roots. And I've been talking about quite a bit from let's say from a PvP perspective, how the power level of characters have been changing. So there's 3 broad things I want to touch on, or break down a little bit, you could say. One of them is the power level that I talk about, like the meta power level or the character power level, character and ships. Like how strong are new characters, how difficult it is to obtain them, and how do they compare against older characters. Because that sort of is the meta in general, is how quickly can a new player, or how quickly do new things pop up that impact the meta compared to older existing teams, counters, ships, whatever. Then what part of the game offers the best incentive to participate? Like what gives the best reward versus the time you put into it? What's the most fun also? I mean, fun is a huge part of the game, hopefully, for many people. But in general, a lot of people look at it from like, if I have to, I'll do some parts of the game I really enjoy, and then I have to do some other parts because the rewards are good. Hopefully those two intersect, but that's one thing I want to look at a bit, because I think this is unquestionably now, like, CG's decision has been made clear. And then what does it mean for GAC, for the game, for competition, etc.? So the character power level. So since Zori, which is like 6 months now, maybe a little bit longer. I think it's been a little bit longer actually, but since Zori, effectively, every single one of the new characters, minus Boba, but they sort of announced him before Zori, so I'm not counting him, even if he was unlocked via Conquest afterwards, have placed in the top of the meta, or that they're used in the majority of GAC matches. And in most cases, they can be used even at a high level at Gear 11. They don't have to be Relic, which is amazing. Like, we have had the best run of characters in the game's history. Almost all of them are usable. None of them are, well, maybe besides Reva, obviously. None of them are gated, besides the payment aspect, behind an unlock like Jedi Knight Luke or something like that. I mean, you can go back a little bit to as far as Jabba to look at this design concept, where Jabba as a GL is like the most ungated GL ever. It's relatively easy to unlock for a brand new player. I think obviously now, especially with the Krayt Dragon raid and the raid changes they made in general, he should be everybody's first GL. And with PvP, like in GAC and TW, he is, I think, the best GL in the majority of situations, regardless of Datacron. So, yeah. Anyway, all these brand new, very powerful characters, but not overpowering, which I think is very important. It's not like they come in and they make a single team the best team. They either take a faction that was sort of underused and make them very powerful, or they take an existing team and like bump it up a notch. Like the design of the recent characters has been amazing and powerful. So it keeps PvP interesting. And this is a concept we'll touch on later. It gives a benefit to people who want to spend versus those who have been playing a long time. And there's a distinction, like one is the lock aspect, like lock behind having other units or access to parts of the game, like Riva, or a certain guild or something like that, or just behind a paywall. If you want to pay for it faster, you can have it faster. But you don't need to, because most of them are effective at Gear 11, which is incredible. So, yeah, this is the thing. All of the new characters are very powerful, affect the meta, and are accessible to everybody, depending on whether you want to farm or pay a little or buy whatever, but they're not gated behind something. So here's where it gets a little bit more time consuming, I guess, in my explanation. So I'm focused just on the past like 2 years. I'm not going to go from the beginning of the game. And I rewrote this so many times while I was trying to summarize it in a succinct way. I semi-succeeded, I think, but it's still a bit lengthy. But I think it's important to go through all the topics. So this is basically a analysis of how the game has changed recently and what I think it means to the future of the game in GAC. And the main way to look at this analysis, the main way I approach this analysis, was to look at the ways that you can improve your roster. Like, what are the rewards, the different ways that the game incentivizes you to play things, and how do they reward you for it? From a CG perspective, their goal is to try and make something that is as little abusable by the players as possible. Or another way to look at it, that they have the most control over. Because the more control that the company has over rewards, the more they can influence players to spend, which is how they make money. So for each of these income sources, now we're from the player's perspective, like how do they make money in the game, or how do they make resources in the game to advance their roster? There's some amount of predictability or RNG. Predictability in terms of what the rewards are, the resource requirements, and this is either you have a certain amount of characters at a certain roster level, like could be a gating mechanic, or you have to spend a lot of time conquest grinding, or you have to have a certain knowledge or skill level, like the Chiari Mundi missions. To do those correctly was like a knowledge skill gate. Very easy for many players to have the required characters, but even if you had the characters at max gear, mods, everything, you could lose if you didn't play correctly. So that's the resource requirements I'm talking about. RNG, this is if you succeeded whatever it is there any randomness in the rewards that you get? And then player interaction could be either competitive, GAC, TW, cooperative, like TB or the new raid system, or neither, like conquest. There's no competition there at all. And then the value of the rewards. Are they good rewards or bad? So I looked at all the income streams or the income sources and tried to compare how it was in the last year or two versus how it is right now and what's changed and if there's any similarities. So I'm not going to talk about every single point, just the ones that I think stand out and help make my point that I'm going to be making, or my points that I'm making at the end here. So character arena, originally very predictable. It didn't really, your actual resources were not that important. It was more like the resource you had compared to the other people on your shards. So sort of moderate. And you could even get you'd get top-ish rewards if you had the time requirement, like you were willing to log on at that particular time every single day. And the value of the rewards is fantastic. It gave crystals the best rewards in the game. This, however, has changed since crystals moved to GAC, so character arena is not totally useless, but mostly useless. Fleet arena. By the way, I'm not ordering these in terms of when they were introduced in the game, just logically how they're structured in my mind. So this is more or less the same as character arena. However, the crystals in fleet arena were added after the fact, and I think people would even participate in fleet arena if there weren't crystals, like if they were taken away. And for the majority of players, this is effectively the replacement of character arena, although definitely fewer players participate in fleet arena because fleets are not nearly as common of a game mode, not nearly as appreciated as a game mode or enjoyed as a game mode by players. So the engagement in fleet arena is much less, even if the rewards are actually better. You get effectively everything you do in character arena. The only thing you trade is the currency, but you get zetas, which is far more valuable than the character arena currency, which gives you like money or prestige, I guess. But so this has really not changed over time. They added crystals. It's quite good, very predictable, valuable reward, a little bit of competition, but really not that much. So third one, raids. So prior to Krayt, raids were sort of weird. They had I sort of want to say like a low roster requirement. Like you could do very well with a smaller variety of teams where there was many options to do well. The rewards were pretty RNG, with the exception of the challenge pit raid and impulse detectors. Like that was an incentive to place highly in that raid. There was competition within your own guild, which is a very bizarre mechanic. And you had to log in at like time-wise, you had a very specific time you had to log in. So in general, a lot of conflicting design mechanics there. However, in the new system, there is cooperation only, no competition. There's no RNG. There's zero RNG, like opposite of RNG. You can choose any reward you want. You know exactly how much of the currency you'll get for those rewards. It is more resource specific. So by that I mean you have to have certain teams. So how you built your roster is very important, or how you build your roster if you're looking in the future. And sort of in terms of the income sources I've talked about so far, it's the first one of the between arena and two arenas where your guild is enormously important. Your guild is the most important in the new raid system because you get the majority of the rewards from the guild path versus the personal path. So being in a good guild for you is incredibly, incredibly valuable. And the old system was good too, but almost as a way to build up smaller accounts because you would get character unlocks. In the new system, I mean, yes, of course you can build up smaller accounts if you join a big raid, but there's less chance of that, I guess, once guilds figure out the range of rewards they want to go for. Like they know that with 40 players they can get a certain box, the 130 box. So there'd be like groupings of guilds where 130 to 265, they'll take new players in, they know they're going to get over 130, but then if they're approaching the 265 mark or they're below the 130 mark, they really want to get to that 130 mark because that's where you get a big boost in rewards. We talk about territory battles. So this is cooperation only. Recently, it started out as very high time investment. The original TVs were all high time investment. Some skill investment, high resource in-game resources like your roster was high. With Rise of the Empire TV, this is much less time investment, like very, very little time investment. In-game resource, like your roster, that makes a great deal of difference. Not necessarily for the battle, but for the platoons or the not the platoons. I hate when people the operations. I hate when people call it platoons, and I just did it myself. Um, no real uh, like time restriction. You have 24 hours the minimum. With the rage, you have 72 hours. It's amazing. Um, so again, with TB, it's very important for the guilds. Prior to the new raid system, it was the most important thing you look at a guild for. For most people, putting outside TW. Um, but now it's the second most after a raid system. So conquest. This is a very high time requirement. You have a lot of time to do it, but it's still a high time requirement. Um, Moderate in-game resource requirement. A lot has to do with skill, I guess. The smaller your roster, the more knowledge/skill you have to be able to make use of interesting mechanics, clever mechanics. Sort of, it's more of a puzzle. The smaller your roster is. Rewards are very good. Zero player interaction required. This is no competition, no guild interaction. This is just individual solo players. So GAC, my favorite game mode. So this was originally mostly RNG based. Like it was sort of like Galactic War, but versus real players. But the actual players you fought were usually most players lost in the old GAC. It was very hard to find an even matchup. So the competitive players who min-max the hardcore players, probably most of the people who are watching or listening to this, I usually did quite well in GAC. There's very little to no competition. And the rewards, you mostly did it for like titles or to be high in the leaderboard or something like that. Because the actual in-game rewards for GAC were mediocre at best. No RNG really, it was just like a social benefits. The slicing materials were nice, but mostly like for people who enjoyed beating up other people. I mean, I loved it, it was fun, but it wasn't that predictable from a reward perspective, and the rewards weren't that good. In the new GAC system, the rewards are extraordinarily predictable. Like 97% of people over time will make exactly the same amount of money, or this crystals, not money, but crystals. Not exactly the same amount. Like each player will sort of get to a level in the rankings where the amount of time and effort they're willing to spend matches those players around them. Maybe they have a huge roster, but they only play one match a week, Or they have a small roster, but are super competitive and play all the time and they only lose when they play with bigger rosters that they just simply can't beat. But in general, most players will make approximately the same amount of crystals every month, broadly speaking. So from a CG perspective, it's very, very predictable. There is no real, you don't get any titles for it. There's no advantage to being number 1 versus number 20 versus there is a little bit. Your end of the month crystal rewards are a little higher, but like your daily, anywhere private one, you'll get the same daily crystals, which is where most of the crystals come from. So people sort of fall, like there's no reason really to play GAC outside of maintaining your division and league, besides enjoying competition and if you find that fun. And usually, assuming everybody has exactly the same interest level in the game, you will do better if you build your roster and have more units and teams available. So it's about like how your allocation of in-game resources. The last one here, I am talking a lot about this. Territory wars. So this is like almost purely people do it for social reasons, for like guild cohesion. Their guild loves it, so they do it with their guild, or they love competing, or they want to be in the best guild in their bracket or range or something like that, or one of the best guilds in the whole of the game. They want to be in one of those. But the rewards are pretty crap in general. They do have the the rank 3 reroll materials, which is the only sort of unique rewards. Oh, and relic 9 materials also. So not total crap, but I would say if you spend time in the game, you can make crystals to buy out of the weekly store, the rank 9, the relic 9 materials, for less total time spent in the game than you could by participating in a hardcore TW guild. Especially if you're saving Omicrons and not spending them on TW units. But anyway, there's a small portion of the game population who really enjoys TW, and there's lots of benefits from like a guild cohesion focus perspective. But the rewards are mostly social, bragging rights, that sort of thing. And very intense. Like you have to have very specific characters, very specific modding, very things you only use twice a month that you don't use in any other parts of the game. And the time requirements, again, depends on how serious your guild is, but still, it's not really 24 hours to attack when you feel like, because there's the different zones you have to work through, much different than GAC where you only have like 2 layers of zones effectively. So high requirements, high sort of barrier to entry, high barrier to doing well, and very easy for players to manipulate. You know, like by that I mean for players to influence. Like in GAC, because you do it so often and the rewards are on a daily basis rather than every specific match, I mean, you get very good rewards if you win a match too. But it's much easier on a guild level to manipulate the rewards strongly in one way or another. Like it's very common for very good TW guilds to win everything, you know, or win like, 80-90% of the time. And there's a lot of those guilds actually. But it's much less common. It's almost impossible for GAC players to do that, just given the matches that they have, the players that they're facing. So, and because of this RNG element of it, and because it's sort of easy to manipulate, that's why the TW rewards in general are not great. So, this was supposed to be simple. Sorry if it wasn't that simple. But I hope you noticed a little bit the patterns that I was trying to touch on as I broke down each of these reward or income sources. So to me, it's very clear that CG is moving their rewards to low RNG, fewer gates, like artificial gates, and more based upon your roster size, I guess you could say, like broadly speaking, or where you've chosen to build your characters. Like, I don't think we'll see very frequently the return of missions like the cam mission in TV, where very little to do with roster size, very much about skill. Like we may see it once or twice, but generally I think it's going to be more about the units that you have. You'll have some level of skill. You know, like even the Reva mission now, you have to play it not wrong. There's always still usually 1 or 2 failures every TB, even for the very good guilds. But it's not hard to do well either. You'll see a lot more of these game modes where everybody can participate in, and the higher you build your roster, the more rewards you'll get. Something like to that effect. With some exceptions, like the raid system in general has made anything up to relic levels very incredibly easy to get. It's the amount of Gear 12 plus characters are going to be enormous with the proliferation of the raid Mark 1 currency and all the Gear 12 gear you can get for such a cheap price. So it also, to me, outlines a couple of game modes that fall outside of this pattern, have not been reworked. And that is Fleet Arena and TW. So Fleet Arena, it's still, you're locked to this 1 hour a day, which is totally different than all of the other game modes now, sort of besides TW. Um, so I think Fleet Arena, either crystals are taken away and moved to some other game mode. Um, well, yeah, I think that's what's going to happen eventually. I don't think they're going to leave Fleet as it is, or they'll change Fleet. They'll change Fleet into a whole new game mode itself, like make it vehicles or something like that. I don't think Fleet is going to stay the same long term. It doesn't fit what CG seems to be doing. Then TW. Again, I think the problem with TW is for the very competitive guilds, the ones that gain the most rewards from it, there's very little interactivity with most of the players. Like, 5 or 10 of the officers are doing all of commands, and the players just have to log in when they're told and do their particular battle, and then that's it. Or there are 8 battles or 10 battles, or whatever. But like, the players aren't making choices on their own. It's a huge overhead for officers and whoever's organizing TW. So that's not really, again, fitting the models. Now, on the other hand, TW is a very sort of separate beast, and there's some political and community reasons I know that CG has kept TW sort of how it is. But it also is clearly outside of the way that they've been changing other systems in their game. So hopefully, not hopefully, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did change how TW functions. Yeah, so what does this all mean in the end? So I do have a few points. I think that it's clear that they're trying to remove the artificial gates or unlock gates from the game modes, not necessarily from characters or roster collection or like unit collection, but from the game modes. So TB, Raids, and GAC and Conquest, you can effectively participate in those at a very small roster size. Maybe not do great and get a high score, but you can still participate. TW as well. So I think we'll continue to see more and more of this. And hopefully in the TB model they have now, they'll add some new missions. TB, the Rise of the Empire TB is definitely like a high-end, large roster size goal or content. But with the raids, they'll add things for other factions, and you'll still be able to do it at non-relic levels, like a Gear 12 or something like that, 5-star, I think, even. Fewer and fewer RNG rewards, so there's no longer Krayts in any of the raids. You get exactly the rewards you want. With basically, I think the way they're going to split it, where if you're doing the content in game, your reward will be very set. If you're paying for something, there'll be some RNG. Broadly speaking, that looks to be the way they're dividing it. Personally, I think that's a great setup. RNG in the actual game rewards that you work hard for, and then you get something crap is no fun. But if you work hard for it and you know you're going to get a certain currency or a certain amount of crystals or something like that, or other materials, then fantastic. Flexible playtimes. Again, this is where TW and Fleet Arena sort of don't fit. But everything else, it's 24-hour minimums. The raids are 3 days. I think that's where everything's going. Just a couple of outliers that are still not there yet. And one thing that is sort of new, not new, but like emphasized extra much with the new raid system is how important guilds are. You're not going to mercenary anymore, which is rare, but still people did it. There's really no point to do that now with all the overlapping cooldowns and territory battles and raids and territory wars, and it'd be very hard to be a mercenary. Very little purpose. And so I really do expect to have an even stronger sort of like striation of guilds, I guess. 130 million guilds, then like the 130 million guilds that are also, they're getting the 130 million box for the Krayt Dragon Raid, and they're doing Rise of the Empire, a certain amount of Reba shards or something like that, all the way up to, I think, last raid there's like 10 plus, and probably in this next one there'll be another 10, 265 million box in the Krayt Dragon Raid. It's like as they introduce more raids, also maybe in another 3 or 6 months or something, this will continue to be sort of like the defining factor. How many rewards are you getting as a guild, and what teams you expect your players to have to contribute to that. And that's, again, yeah, this is why I think in the guild competition space, there's like something missing. All we really have is TW, and it's very old and unpolished, and it has a lot of downsides and very overhead intensive, and the rewards are meh, and it only happens twice a month. There's something missing there. I think something else is going to happen. And you know, I wanted to mention something here about rewards in general. There's a recent video, I've seen it in a couple of the streams at the end of last season. People who are streaming raids like Skelterix and Arnold, and I mean all the content creators basically were streaming raids. But Xerath made a video recently. Xerath's a great guy, excellent GAC player. He's not really calling out him, but it was more the idea that he clearly laid out in the video that I've heard a number of other people saying is like, why play GAC now when the Krayt raid takes up so much time? Why play GAC, but why spend so much time on it? And I don't really understand this. Like, I think it's just teething pains because the raid is new and people are learning it, and the rewards are great. And even now, they haven't really fixed, like, every reset you get 5 more tries, you can use your remaining units and stuff like that. So there's some weird dynamics in there. But like, once all of that's fixed and you only have 5 tries total for the whole raid, the actual amount of time spent on the raid is quite less compared to assuming you hit the other raids. Like, if you did the Sith raid, you know, it's like 20 minutes using SLKR or something. If you did C-Pit, that was probably 30 minutes, I guess. Let's say down to 20 minutes, like 40 minutes, 45 minutes for those 2 raids. And you did them on average, like, let's say you spent an hour and a half on average every week-ish if you hit the raids. And a reason not to hit the raids, I know for many people, is because the rewards were sort of random, like do nothing and get okay rewards. You got better rewards if you hit the raid, but not guaranteed. Whereas the Tusken raid, or the Krayt raid, the time requirement and the remodding requirement is pretty low. Like, I do pretty well in the raid. My guild, I'm in the top 3. Usually number 1, but sometimes number 2 or number 3. I remod less than half of my characters across the entire raid. I don't have any specific mods, I just move mods from another unit. Like, if I want fast mods, I move Piet's mods. You know, if I want high damage, low speed mods or something, I'll move Marin's mods. I don't actually have like particular raid mods. Me personally, I haven't found any need. And the total amount of time I spend for 5 teams is like, it's less than 30 minutes. So if it's less than an hour a week, to me, that is an improvement, because I did hit full challenge pit and the Sith raid before. So I'm saving like 30 to 50% of my time for vastly improved rewards. Everybody is different, certainly, but I'm actually saving time with the new raid, and I make way better rewards. And while the overall rewards in GAC are sort of static, like eventually everybody's sort of 50-50, you know? We win half the time. The best part of GAC is the competition, like playing other players, trying out new teams, etc., etc. That's what I really enjoy about GAC. And I think most of the competitive players are in the same boat. But I think what all these comments are sort of like indicating that people are spending, or needing to spend, or feeling like they need to spend more and more time in the game to be competitive, I guess you could say, or to do it all. Because with Conquest and Rise of the Empire TB and the Krayt Dragon Raid and GAC and Territory, it's just a lot of stuff to do. And because GAC yeah, like try and have fun, which is I think the best way to approach GAC anyway. Um, and don't stress so much when you lose. Just enjoy when you win. Most rewards, minimum time, sort of thing. But actually try a bit. I think that is the tough thing for people, just finding the time to spend on all of these game modes because it's getting a bit much, especially considering the reward structure. So really, yeah. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is there is I think, a clear direction that CG is going, how they're structuring their rewards. And I think some of the outliers in this structure are part of the reason why uh, people are feeling a little bit of burnout. And hopefully, as they fix those or adjust those, they also, what's the best way to put this? They also make it more optional, or people realize, that's not CG, sorry, people realize that the way that the reward structure is being built is the difference between being in the top like 5% and the top 30% is extremely minimal from a reward perspective. So have fun, balance your time, and you don't have to be the number one in reward. You can be number 7 or something like that. But it could be half the amount of time it takes you, and you get 70% of the rewards. It's a win-win. And as I said all of that now, I'm talking about how I hope there's a new, like, if you have 10 minutes to spare some time and you have nothing else to do, wouldn't it be cool to have some sort of competitive game mode? What? Another thing to do with my time? Yeah, that's something I think would be fun. Um, yes, so how does that all relate to GAC? That is a very good point. So in GAC, I think we'll see a lot more of Tuscan and Mandos. They're very useful and good and reliable in the Krayt raid, although Tuscans are really like a R7, R8 thing, which is going to be rare for many people for a while. Mandos are a great 1.8 or 2.7 mil team. I think we'll see some people at least taking all of their Old Republic up to R5, because that's a pretty easy team to get like a million at R5 without a lot of work. Like one remod, maybe a skip mission, some good offense or something, and that's pretty easy. Who knows what'll happen with the other upcoming changes? Because we're getting the new capital ship. We're maybe getting a new GL. I mean, probably a new GL. When? But probably eventually. We have Survivor Cal Kestis arriving. There's been some other rumors of something else happening, some other content. We'll have a new zone in Rise of the Empire TV. Yeah, it's going to be a very, very active next 6 months. I think it's promising for the game, the way that CG is designing all of their rewards, or the way that you get rewards, removing RNG and giving you more flexibility in when you want to do them. But I think it's an adjustment for players too, because like if you go back a bit where you wanted to get like all the really competitive players wanted to get number 1 in arena, number 1 in fleet, that gave you the best rewards. And I think people still have this idea, like going into GAC or other things, where you want to get number 1 to get best rewards. You don't have to. Like meet the tier that you want the rewards from, but you don't have to be like number 1. Consider the amount of time you want to spend and try and use that as a qualification to how many rewards you want to get. Like, what is it really worth to get 10% more rewards? Do you want 100 more currency or a free hour in your day or week or whatever? I think that's a better way to look at it. Anyway, I managed to go almost to an hour. This is a fascinating topic for me today. I hope you all have a good time in this upcoming season. Good luck preparing. Good luck farming Datacrons. And we'll talk to you guys later. Cheers.